Hi, I'm Barbralu Cohen. I was born in Lincoln, Nebraska in 1949, and I spent, I think, the first 10 years of my life in Lincoln. And my mother was Selma Hill Cohen, who also was born in Lincoln, and my father was Robert Cohen, who was born in Omaha, but his mother, I believe, was born in Lincoln. So I was a third generation Jewish Nebraskan. And I grew up with three brothers on Sheridan Boulevard in Lincoln. And we could walk to shul, the shul that my grandfather started, Dan Hill, to Fereth, Israel. And in Lincoln, I remember my life as very surrounded by family. My grandparents, my Aunt Betty and Uncle Leo Hill, and in Omaha, my grandma and grandpa Hill Cohen, Sam and Leah Cohen, and my Aunt Joey and Uncle Ray, and my Aunt Simon, and my Aunt Ruth and Uncle Art Goldstein, and all my cousins. So it was a very family time, and we had a big house with a big yard, and I had a playhouse, and I was the girl among three brothers.
Tell me about your mother.
My mother was very educated. She had a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Nebraska and a master's degree in psychological counseling, I think, or psychological testing from Northwestern University. And she grew up in Lincoln, relatively privileged. Her father was the American dream epitomized. He raised him, he came to this country from Belarus not speaking English, and he became very successful in the metals business in Nebraska. And everybody was always very proud that he ran for Congress as a socialist in Nebraska and got 300 and something votes during the Depression. And my mother, he bought the first dishwasher in Lincoln, Nebraska, and the first disposal. And my mother grew up having a car, which the joke was my father fell in love with her because she had a car. And he loved cars. He was an automotive engineer. So my mother was, I would say, a very demanding woman. She knew what she wanted. And although she was raised in privilege, she, like her father, really believed in helping people and was a devoted Democrat and proud to be a liberal in the days when you weren't, it was a bad, recent days, when it wasn't such a proud thing to be. And she raised all her children to be avid Democrats and liberals and support liberal causes. And of course she was a Zionist. We have a large family in Israel because my grandfather's twin brother went to Palestine when my grandfather came here from Belarus, fleeing the Tsar's armies. And she devoted her life to American Jewry and to Israel, I would say. I believe that my father also lived the American dream and pulled himself up to becoming very successful, starting with not much. And we have a book of what he spent in college down to the penny. He documented everything he spent in college, and then he became very, very successful in the metals business in Denver. But he really created the vessel in which my mother could be the activist and philanthropist that she became. I think that's pretty amazing what they did together.
What was it like growing up at home?
Well, what was it like? Well, I had three brothers, and I feel like that's the central fact of my life, that I grew up with these guys. My brother Richard taught me how to catch a grounder, and I loved my oldest brother Alan, who was very smart. He was 7 years older than I, which felt like a pretty significant difference at that time, you know, when you're young. And then my younger brother Murray was my first baby, even though he's only 3 years younger than I. I remember getting to help take care of him when he was a baby. But I was different. I was the girl, and I was special. My father loved me unconditionally all my life, and I really feel like that helped me to become a pretty, well, I don't know how to say it. Well, just to be unconditionally loved is a wonderful thing in your life, and I had that. I had that knowing I was special, and when I walked into the room, until the day he died, when I walked into the room, there was a smile that I got. Of course, it was Bob Cohen, and he loved everybody, but I was special to him, and that helped me feel like I was a special person all my life. And I don't think in an arrogant way, but it created a certain amount of sanity in me, although there's plenty of craziness also. So growing up in Lincoln with all that family and with those brothers, we had fun. We had a lot of fun. We had a boat that my father built in our garage in Lincoln on Sheridan Boulevard, and we had that boat when we moved to California for a brief period, and then in Denver. In fact, my oldest child went on that boat. I don't think my youngest child did. Not the same boat, but as the boats progressed and got nicer. It was a Jewish ritual was very important in our house. We had Friday night dinner together every Friday night, even through high school. Then we might go to our various whatever as teenagers, but we had Friday night dinner at home, and we cleaned up for Friday night dinner, and we said the brachas, and my mother cleaned the house for Passover, and she didn't change the dishes, but we would use her good dishes all the time during Passover. And at Hanukkah, when I was a child, we would have big open houses, and she would invite all our teachers and lots of people who had never been to a Hanukkah celebration, had never heard the candles being blessed or anything. So so Jewish ritual was really important, and it was also important to my mother that we share these rituals with the Gentile community, and that they learn about us and how we're different, but how we're not different. And we would take matzahs to school during Passover. During Passover, we did not have bread in our house. We didn't go out. We kept Pesach. And but we would take matzah to school, and we were probably, maybe there were other Jewish kids in my class. I don't remember that. There were very few Jewish kids my age in Lincoln in those days. And so people had never had matzah before, but we all took a matzah to school and shared it with people. And so...
Were you active in any Jewish youth groups in Lincoln?
Not in Lincoln, because I was 10 when we left there. But in Denver, I was very active in United Synagogue Youth, the conservative youth group. I was president of USY for 2 years. And that was really important to me. That was really important to me. And
when you had these holiday meals at home, were there other family members that came beside you and your brothers?
Well, in Lincoln, certainly. I also remember, this isn't Jewish, but I also remember taking the train to Omaha for Thanksgiving at Aunt Ruthie's house. And I don't know how many years we did that, if we only did that once. But I've talked about that with my brothers. I remember getting on the train. My parents didn't come, they drove. But the four of us, got to take the train at least once. So that was really fun. And then when we moved to California, we did have family there in Southern California. Cousins of my mother and cousins of my father all lived in Southern California. So we would get together with them. I especially remember my mother's first cousin, Irving Hill, who later became a Supreme Court justice in California, but we got together with them quite a bit. My parents were very fond of them. And in Denver, we did not have any family, but there were lots of people from Nebraska and Denver that we would get together with, and there would always be people, and there would also always be students, because my mother would call Denver University, which was right down the street from our house, and invite people who didn't have a place to go for Seder or for whatever, and they would come and have whatever, Shabbos or Seder or whatever it was with us. So it was always a big deal.
I want to hear about your father now.
Oh, goody. My father, Bob Cohen, is certainly a legend among his children, if no one else. My father, I miss him. He died last December, been less than a year. And he was a guy, everybody loved Bob Cohen. He just was a guy who loved his life, who, as my brother Alan said at his funeral, and as I said earlier, live the American dream. That's an idea I lifted from my brother's speech. He really made himself, he became a success because of his own hard work. And he believed in hard work, but he also believed in having fun. And we had a lot of fun. We traveled and we had the boat and we skied and he loved life. My father loved his life. And even when he became successful, he really appreciated what he had. He was always grateful and aware that he was so lucky, and not just lucky, that he had earned what he had. And he always drove, well, not always, but once he became successful, he drove Cadillacs and he traveled first class, and when they traveled abroad, they would have a driver, and he would always be sure to tell you about it, but he wasn't arrogant about it. When Bob Cohen told you about his driver in Geneva, you just enjoyed it along with him. You didn't think he was being arrogant. He just wasn't that kind of guy. He was very generous. He was the most generous person I've ever known, certainly with me and my boys, and certainly philanthropically. And he was interested in the world. He was certainly interested in World War II and Civil War history, and he awakened that love in my son Nathan. And it was really fun to talk to him about the war. He loved to tell his stories about the war. And although he never went abroad. He didn't go overseas. He had some kind of ear thing that kept him from going overseas. Although he tried to go overseas 3 times. But he still had great war stories. And he created the life that allowed my mother to become the philanthropist and the activist that she was. So together, they really supported each other's lives. And when I look at that now, looking back, I think, wow, he allowed her to become who she was, and she really allowed him to, love skiing and to go skiing a lot, even though she didn't ski and whatever. They really helped each other grow.
Do you have any specific memories of one-on-one relations with your dad that you can share with me?
Oh, yeah. I think one of my fondest memories is every Sunday morning. I always got up early. I was always the first one up in my family. And my dad got up early before all his life until he really was old, and he had a shunt put in his brain, and then he slept a lot. But until that time, we both were early risers, and on Sunday mornings, he and I would go out to breakfast. And in Lincoln, we went to the Cornhusker Hotel, and in California, we would walk up to the Beverly Hills Hotel, and in Denver, we went to Ryder's Manor, which was a hotel in Denver at that time. It no longer exists. Actually, it's where we lived for, I think, a week when we moved there, because our house wasn't ready yet. And and in Beverly Hills, we would walk up and we would talk the whole way, and he would ask me questions and he would talk, and as I got older, he wanted to know what made me tick and what I was interested in and what I thought about things. And I remember once we ate breakfast at the Beverly Hills Hotel in this little coffee shop, and it was just a counter with maybe 12 seats in it. And often we went in there and we were the only ones. And we became friends with the chef, whose name was Gary. I'll never forget this guy. And one day we walk in there and there's a guy sitting at the counter, and my dad says, "Don't I know your name?" And the man says, "Yes, you probably know who I am." And my dad introduced me to this guy, Hank Greenberg. And my dad was so thrilled to be eating breakfast with Hank Greenberg. And Hank Greenberg was very gracious, and I'll just never forget that. It was kind of interesting to see my dad, who really was, even when he was struggling with his business in California, was always on top of the world. He was kind of humbled by Hank Greenberg. So I remember that, and I remember the boat. We just all loved the boat. Although, it's funny, my brothers and I remember that, we grew up with this boat all our lives, certainly my brother Murray and I. And there never really was a time that we didn't have the boat in our lives. So we knew how to run the boat, and we knew how to get it off the trailer and get it on the trailer. But my father would go crazy every time we put the boat on the trailer, and he would just start yelling. He had a temper, and he would yelling at us to put it this way and put it that way. And it's just something we laugh about now, because we knew how to do it, but he went nuts. He just, that was a funny thing in our lives. And my mother was raised Orthodox. My father didn't even have a bar mitzvah. But my mother didn't keep a kosher home, although we didn't have shrimp or bacon. We didn't have shellfish or that kind of treif in our house. But my father loved bacon, so when we would go out, those breakfasts, we always had bacon. And she knew it. I mean, it wasn't a secret or terrible thing or anything. But I remember that, and I just remember, I remember traveling. We'd take these long trips in the summer. We went up to Lake of the Woods in Canada, or we'd go to Yellowstone when we lived in Nebraska, and when we moved to Southern California, we went everywhere. Although he was working then. I think this was maybe my brother Alan driving us around by then. We were practically tourists in Southern California, and we loved living there.
How did that go with all these kids in the car, your mother and dad?
Well, one time we took a trip. I think it was that trip up to Canada. We had the four of us, my mom and dad, and we had a young man who was my brother Alan's age, and we had my cousin Tamar, what was her maiden name? Gill, from Tel Aviv, and she was college age. So we had 6 kids in the car, and I'm pretty sure I remember that, and 3 of them were teenagers or older, so they were big people. And I think I sat on a stool in the back seat, not on the seat part, but on the floor part of that. It was a Cadillac. It was a big old 1959 Cadillac. So it was a big car. But so probably 3 people were in front and 5 in back. So we fought, and we would play games, and we would drive my mother crazy. We really knew how to get her, and we did. We really enjoyed it. And we talk about this now. I remember Don was talking about, my husband last week was talking about how we would interrupt Grandma. And she would go nuts, and she'd say, "Quit interrupting me." And so we would let her begin to tell her story, and then we'd interrupt her right away. We loved doing that. And we did it all our lives. I mean, even into adulthood. So
I'd like to hear a little bit about your relationship with your grandparents on both sides.
Well,
Some of your experiences.
Yeah,
with them.
I didn't know them as well because, for one thing, I was in 5th grade when we left Lincoln, so I was young. And with my grandma and grandpa Cohen being here in Omaha, I didn't see them nearly as much. But I do remember, in fact, I told my cousin Jay this last night, I would always know, so this is my early elementary years, if we walked in the house and you smelled cigar, you knew that Grandma and Grandpa Cohen had driven in from Omaha to see us, and we would always be so happy to see them. And I also remember as a really young child, Murray was a baby, so I must have been maybe 4. My parents took my 2 older brothers to New Orleans. They drove. And we stayed at Grandma Cohen's house. And I just remember being in that house with them and missing my family, but liking being there too. So I don't have really specific memories of Grandma and Grandpa Cohen. My Grandma and Grandpa Hill, I of course knew better because they were in Lincoln, and we spent a lot of time with them. I remember once having to, these are such random memories, peeling eggs for Seder. It was a big pot full of eggs, and all the little cousins had arrived. I must have been 10, but I was peeling and being mad that I had to peel the eggs, and all my little cousins were running around and I didn't get to play with them. And to this day, I hate peeling eggs.
Do you remember the specifics about the Seders? How many people were there?
Oh, lots.
How long they went on?
Well, they went on forever. My Grandpa Hill could talk, and he could expound on Talmud and Torah and whatever, and so he would. And the Seders just went on forever. And there would be, whosever dining room it was, my grandma's or my mother's or my Aunt Betty's, that room was packed with extra tables and, and everybody. It was pretty raucous and fun, even though it went on forever. So it's pretty hazy memory.
So your memories of Lincoln are a little bit hazy too, aren't they?
They're hazy but very fond. I love going back there. I always feel some kind of bond. I love going there. I was there in June with my husband and my younger son, and it was fun to read. And I took my parents there after my father stopped driving. It was 3 or 4 years ago. I drove them to Lincoln and Omaha. And I could remember how to get around, and they couldn't always tell me. I mean, I found our house, and this last trip I took my son and my husband to the Sunken Gardens, which is a place I remembered very fondly. And even though it's changed so tremendously, I remember it very fondly.
Tell me a little bit about your brothers.
Oh, my brothers. Well, I love my brothers, and they're all very different people. My brother Alan, who's 7 years older than I, is very brilliant and mostly retired now. And what he's doing in his retirement really is studying American history, particularly history of the West, which, as it happens, is one of my favorite topics. And in fact, he may be teaching a class maybe not this fall, but soon at a community college. And he has been married to Sue. They met when she was 15, and I must have been 11 when we lived in Southern California. And so Alan is a man of few words, I would say, but extremely well informed and extremely bright. And you always want to know what it is he thinks about politics or current events, because he's very well informed, and it's always very interesting to talk to him. I always enjoy that. And his kids, Stephen is a doctor in Tucson with 4 kids, and I'm very fond of them. I have often gone down there to visit them in the winter. And Stephen,
you time that, don't you?
Oh yeah, because I don't like reptiles. And they have a beautiful home and these 4 fantastic kids, and I'm crazy about his wife. And Stephen says, I've always been a great aunt. This is my nephew, my oldest nephew. And then his brother Michael lives in Denver and has 2 gorgeous kids. And Michael now is president of the family business, Iron and Metals Incorporated. And I also am just wild about Michael. He's just a great kid. My brother Richard and I, he came along, and then I came along, the girl. So we had kind of a stormy, as I recall, a stormy relationship growing up. But then I followed him to the University of Michigan, and it was really important to me that he was there. And I really, I don't even know if he knows this, I really kind of relied on him. I didn't know anybody there but him at this huge university. And it was really a wonderful thing for me to have my brother there. And I really just, it just gives me a warm heart to think about the times we had
But
in
tell
Ann Arbor.
him what Richard does.
Richard is an epidemiologist. He's an industrial toxicologist, and he is a national expert. He travels all over the country testifying in trials and helping companies, make their workers safe or whatever it is they do. And he teaches at the University of California at San Francisco Medical School. And he's got 2 wonderful kids. Laura just graduated Berkeley Law, and her older sister Rebecca just had her first baby. Her baby, my mother's 7th great-grandchild, was born the day my mother went into hospice last October. So I love my nieces and nephews. They're all great. So as adults, Richard and I are not close, but I am very fond of him and his wife, Sue. I have 2 sister-in-laws named Sue Cohen. And I just love being with them. They have a wonderful family. They have a great life. And he's a really good person who never was close to my parents, but which is just so sad to me. But he is just a great person. I really enjoy him. And Murray, my younger brother, is the brother with whom I'm closest. And he and I especially, well, all our lives we've been close, but we went through the deaths of my parents together. And that was it's been an amazing journey. And after my parents died, my dad died in December, Murray and his wife Sharon and their 10-year-old Jimmy flew to Ethiopia and adopted and brought home my parents' newest grandchild, not great-grandchild, but grandchild, Yenanesh, who now has celebrated her 4th birthday and came to this country. It's just incredible to me. She left Ethiopia with these people she had known for a week and got in this, I don't even know if she'd ever seen an airplane before, got into an airplane. It must have seemed like she was in that airplane forever, landed in Denver. There is snow on the ground. It's just phenomenal. And she is the brightest, sharpest, sunshiniest little girl. She's just an angel coming amongst us. She's just a doll. And Jimmy is just a pistol. He's a smart, very high energy guy. So, and Murray also works for the family business. He runs the yard. So I don't remember what my parents told us about moving to California. I know that my dad wanted to own his own business, and he found this steel rolling mill in Southern California. And I remember the actual move. I remember driving in my brother Alan's Oldsmobile, which I believe had been my grandpa Hill's Oldsmobile, and everybody else was in somebody else's car. It must have been my mother's Cadillac. And I remember getting to ride with my brother Alan, and that was really great. I got to be with Alan. And so we moved to Beverly Hills, and we loved it because Betty Davis had lived in this house that my parents bought. And the tourist buses would go by, and so we would be out in the front yard playing football or something, and we would wave to the tourists. And we just thought that was the funniest thing that ever happened. And let's see, I started at El Rodeo Elementary School in 5th grade, and I could walk to Hebrew school in Westwood from school, and I did that once or twice a week, I remember. And there were some other kids in my Hebrew school class that I would walk with. And as I said, it was a really fun time in our lives, the way I remember it. We would go to Disneyland, not a lot, but every now and then we went to Disneyland, and a lot of family came out to stay with us. I remember Aunt Ruthie coming several times. Joey, David, and Judy came on their honeymoon, and it was just a really fun time in our lives. And we got robbed once. In fact, Ruthie was there. I wonder if it was when my grandmother was sick. And so my mom wasn't home, but Ruthie had come to stay with us, Aunt Ruthie Goldstein, while my mom was out of town. And she had just come back. Well, I might be getting trips confused, but one time she came on her way back to Omaha from Hawaii, and she taught me how to do the hula.
That's right.
And I don't know if it's the same time or not, but we got robbed. I remember that we had come home from my mother's cousin Irving's house, and I somehow think my mother was out of town, and Ruthie was there. And we got robbed, and I remember that they had taken my mother's mink coat or something, I don't know what, but it was a terrible. Well, Irving Hill was my mother's first cousin, Nathan Hill's son, and we had never met these people. I had never met these people until we moved there. And we spent a lot of time with them. They had a swimming pool, and we would go over there a lot and swim. And my parents, were very social with them. And he's the one who later became, he was an attorney, and he later became, he was on the Supreme Court of the state of California. And he was a wonderful guy. And in fact, recently, well, it was before I drove my parents to Omaha, I flew with them to North Carolina, and we saw one of his sons, who's a doctor in Asheville, I think. And so those are cousins. So this kid was not a kid, he's my age, but he was my second cousin. So let's see, so California, I remember, and my brother Richard was vice president of his junior class. And of course, Alan was on the newspaper at Beverly Hills High, and he met Susie there. And I remember when my parents told us that we were moving to Denver. My dad's business did not succeed. He was competing with Bethlehem Steel and U.S. Steel and these big, big players, and it went bankrupt. So then my grandfather and I think my Uncle Art and some partners helped my dad buy this junkyard in Denver. And I remember we were all cuddling one morning, must have been a Sunday morning, on my parents' bed in Beverly Hills, and they said, we're moving to Denver, and won't it be great? There'll be snow, and we can, ski, and blah, blah, blah. And it was very hard for my brother Richard, because he was this really popular, vice president of his class, and he was leaving that for his senior year, and it was very hard for him. And it was hard for me. We moved in January, so we started in the middle of a school year. This was 7th grade for me, and I was with kids who, had known each other all their lives, and here I was, this new middle school. Now it would be middle school. So it was a tough move, and I remember that my mother was depressed, and I could just tell that something was wrong. She was not happy. And in those days, the word depression, I don't think had been invented yet, but she was definitely depressed. I remember that as a really hard adjustment for all of us. And we lived on Bates Street, which is right across the street from the development my parents moved to at the end of their lives, which was a big empty field when we lived there, and we would ride our bikes in that field and play ball in that field. But I always thought it was so funny that they ended up living right across the street. So we moved to Denver. As I said, I was in 7th grade, and it was tough, but we finally all got over it, I think. And
Was it hard to develop friends when you first moved to Denver?
Well, I thought I hated Denver, and I never wanted to come back. And then I went away to college, and then I went to graduate school, and I thought, what am I, crazy? I am going back to Colorado. Where could I live better? And when I never went to a high school reunion until my 30th high school reunion, which was 10 years ago. And when I went back to my 30th high school reunion, all of a sudden I realized I had all these friends, all these people who remembered me and loved me, and several of them, I was the only Jewish person they knew, and they thanked me for opening their eyes to things about being Jewish, and that was a really heartwarming experience. So I felt like it was tough to make friends, but I did have friends, and I just kind of didn't realize what that was. I was very active in high school. I was the feature editor on the newspaper, so I began my journalistic career then, and of course, I was in the pep club, and I don't even remember half the stuff I did. But I was very happy to get out of Denver and go to Ann Arbor, and I had a ton of fun in college. I loved college. And then I went to New York to graduate school at Columbia. And that was very hard for me. Being in New York City, it was very dirty and crime-ridden, and I always felt like going outside was like going into a more intense inside. And I didn't like it. I mean, I did a lot of stuff. I went to museums and I went to movies 4 times a week. I thought I was going to be a famous film critic. And went to plays and, did all the stuff, but I just did not like New York City. I didn't feel safe there. And after I got my master's degree, I didn't even go to my graduation. I just went home to Denver, and I bought a car, and with Jim Freed, who I was living with at the time, from Omaha, I traveled around the West, and that was a really great experience. For 6 months, we traveled from Colorado to Wyoming to Montana to Washington and down the coast, and ended up in Oak Creek Canyon in Arizona, and then came back to Denver and got married finally, which had been driving my mother crazy, and moved to Boulder. So that was I think it was 71 or 72. And I worked at the university for a couple of years, and then got my first job in newspapers at the Daily Camera. And then that marriage fell apart, and I met Nathan's dad, Jeff Manning, and he had just taken the bar exam and got his first job in Pueblo, Colorado. So we moved to southern Colorado and bought this 10-acre farm with the help of my parents. And Nathan was born in 1979, and I felt like that, I don't know, I just loved being a mom. That was kind of the beginning. I mean, I love my career in journalism, but being a mom kind of was the beginning of my really finding myself and loving my life. And it's also when my relationship with my mother changed. My mother was somebody who knew what was right. She thought she knew what was right. And you did things her way, and that was the right way to do things. And if you didn't do them her way, she didn't like it, and she would let you know. And that's why I said at her funeral, it was tough to be her child. But when Nathan was born, I'll never forget this, she told me I was holding him too much as a newborn, as an infant. And I said, Mom, if God hadn't wanted me to hold him so much, he wouldn't have made Nathan so cute. And my mother, startled, she got it. And it was really the first time I remember my mother learning something from me and accepting me as an adult from whom she could really learn something and have some respect for. And it changed our relationship. And it really helped me forgive her for being so dogmatic. And it also helped her respect me more. And she was a fabulous grandmother to my children. And it really just changed our whole relationship. And so when Nathan was 2, I left Jeff for reasons that Nathan knows. He was an alcoholic, and it just was not working out. And I went to my parents' house, and but then I moved back to Boulder. I stayed with some friends, and finally I got a place. My parents helped me financially for quite a while. And I have a little house my brothers still talk about, my little hippie shack. Yeah, and it was just a little 1-bedroom little shack that I loved. And Nathan would go back and forth. Jeff and I would drive him back and forth, so he saw his father quite a bit. And a year later, I met Don. And we had what I call the glacial relationship. I was never going to get married again. I didn't want to have any more children. I mean, how could I do any better? And then, and Don had never been married, and he is 2 years older than I, so I don't know what the math is. But anyway, but finally about 7 years later, I think, Don decided he wanted to have his own child, and I said, well, I'm not going to break up with you because you want a child. And so we got married, and we had Jacob. So, and all this time, my mother and father were very much involved in my children's lives. They came to see Nathan when he was 1 day old in the hospital in southern Colorado, and they were at the hospital when Jacob was born. And they were an intrinsic part of my children's lives. At a certain point, Nathan said he had 3 houses. He had his mom's house, his dad's house, and his grandma's house. And they would come to my children's plays or concerts or ball games or whatever. They were there. And we went to their house a lot, or they'd go to, we'd come down to Denver and go to the zoo, or they were very much a part of our family's lives.
On Dan Hill's side, your grandfather
Yes.
Dan, how many children did he have?
My grandfather and grandmother had 4 children, and that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked. My Aunt Ruth, their oldest child, died of multiple sclerosis when I was 3 months old. She was an amazing musician. She was a harpist, but she studied piano at Juilliard. And now this is a story, I think this is true, but I need to check. She studied piano at Juilliard, and she couldn't get a job in New York City as a pianist, so she became a harpist. And within 2 years, she was playing harp with the Dorsey Brothers and Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole, she also played with. And we have a letter from Frank Sinatra when she got ill. And so I never met her. And then my Uncle Leo Hill, who everybody knows, 95 years old, living in Lincoln. And then my mother was the 3rd, and her sister Gita Bestman, who lives in Madison, Wisconsin, whom everybody loves. So those are the Hill children. So I remember, after we knew we were moving to Denver, I remember the moment that my father thought of the business name, Iron and Metals Incorporated. For some reason, he was brushing my hair, which I don't remember him doing very often, and he said, I know what the name is going to be, and he was so excited. And he moved to Denver before we did. I don't know how many months, but he lived in an apartment near Colorado Boulevard in Mexico. And then my mother flew out one weekend, and they bought a house, and then we moved, as I said, in January. It was one of the snowiest winters on record. And then we moved into our house. We lived in that hotel for a week, and then we moved into our house. And the business was located at 585 Walnut, I think, or something like that, down by the Platte River, in what now is Auraria, a beautiful campus where there's 4 community colleges all together, and now it's been urban developed. But back then it was not so nice. And I did work there. I would go there in the summers once a week and help the office. I wouldn't do nothing. I didn't do much. But my brothers worked there. And all I remember is, these kind of dingy offices. There was a flood in Denver, and now I can't remember what year it was, maybe 64 or 65. The week of my brother Murray's bar mitzvah, let's see, he was born in 52, so 65 maybe, June of 1965, and the Platte River flooded, and it flooded my dad's junkyard and the office. Mm-hmm. And I remember going down there, I think with Murray and my dad that night, and there were police, you couldn't get in, but he owned a business, so we got to go in where the flood had receded. And I don't know what that did in terms of setting his business back. I don't know, but at some point IBM built a manufacturing plant in northern Colorado, and my dad got the contract. You couldn't resell the computers. They all went into scrap if they were if something happened to them. So my father got the contract to scrap the computers, and that is what made his wealth, the copper and the gold on the circuit boards. And I remember one of my brother Richard standing in our garage one summer, terrible heat, breaking apart these circuit boards. and separating the different precious metals. So that's what made his business a success. And then I don't remember, because I was either in college, I must have been in college when he moved the business. He sold the land and he moved the business farther north to 58th Street, where it is now. And at some point, Alan had been an economist with the Agency for International Development in Colombia and in Guatemala. First in Guatemala, where Mike and Steve were born, and then in Colombia. And at some point, he came to work for my dad, and Murray had worked for my dad, beginning as a truck driver, and then he left. I'm not sure if he left to finish college or he'd already finished college. He took a while to finish college. And then, but Murray came back and began to work for the company. So, so they really, shared the wealth and made a family business. And to this day, it's important to them that it remain a family business. I just had this discussion with Murray recently. So that's kind of the story of Iron and Metals. And it grew, and it's growing like crazy now because all the metal's going to China. So Murray has said, Dad's rolling over in his grave because the price of metals is so great, and it's all being sold. It's just, you can't keep it. It's all going to China.
Then as your parents got ill, can you tell me that story?
Yeah, my father, in the 80s, was having a lot of headaches, and long story short, he had hydrocephalus, and they put a shunt in his brain to drain the fluid into his stomach. And I think within maybe 8 or 10 years, that shunt, the system was clogged, and no one had told us the system had to be replaced every now and then. There's a timeline, and we didn't know that. And my father almost died. They replaced the system, and the system they replaced it with malfunctioned. And so within a span of, I don't know how many years, he'd had 4 brain surgeries. So he became cognitively, it wasn't dementia, but he was definitely cognitively impaired. Got quiet and sleepier, which he never was. He was so vivacious. He was a party guy. And my mother, increasingly as the years went by, took more and more care of him. And that is why they moved in 1999 into this condo, because the presumption was that he would die first and she would have a place that she felt safe. It was a gated community, and it was, so they moved. And she wanted to move while they were still together and they could decide together. And he certainly was functional. You could sit down and have a great conversation with him and laugh and talk about current events and everything. But so that's when she wanted to move, and she got rid of truckloads of stuff at that point, for which I thanked her. And but as the years went by, he got more and more frail, quiet, and more introverted, which he never ever was. And so taking care of him, she really hid how much she had to do to take care of him. We really had no idea. And so last September, she fell and gave herself a concussion, and they took her to the hospital. Well, I don't know when she gave herself the concussion, because they took her to the hospital and she fell in the hospital, and they took her to a trauma hospital, and it's a long story, but they put in a feeding tube because they found out she was malnourished, and they thought they could bring her back and that she would recover from the concussion. But within the course of a week, we realized that she was very uncomfortable. She wasn't getting any nutrients. She wasn't getting any stronger. And so with many conversations with her doctors and my brothers, Alan and Murray, and Richard always on the phone and always available, and he also talked to the doctors, and he was very helpful in translating to us what the doctors were saying. We all 4 concurred that we needed to get that tube out of her, get her comfortable, and get her into hospice. So a week later, on a Thursday, she died. It was Simchat Torah. And my rabbi thought that was a very significant day to die, because it's the end of the cycle of reading the Torah, and it's the beginning. So she just thought that was great. My rabbi was all excited about that. My rabbi who knew and loved my mother. And Marie and I were with her, and the angels were there. I said, Marie, the angels are here. And they were. You could hear them. You could feel them. And Marie and I, the Rockies had just gotten the pennant. My mother was a huge Rockies fan. She watched the Rockies on television. And they would go to games when they were younger. And so we kept saying, Mom, the Rockies are in the World Series. And we kept telling her, we don't know if she got that message or not. And the night she died, we were in the hospice with the playoff, the other league's playoffs games on the TV all night long, and the sound off. And Murray brought his guitar, and he and I sang to her, and we read her favorite poetry, and we just had a wonderful night. And then she just sighed and left us. And so peaceful. The hospice nurses said it was the most peaceful death they had ever seen. And I don't know if they say that to everybody, but it was really an amazing, amazing event. And then I went home, and Murray went to tell Dad, and Dad sobbed and sobbed, he said. And we had that was a Thursday, so we waited till Sunday for the funeral so people could come into town. And it was supposed to be a snowy, terrible day. It was early October, and it was a sunny, beautiful day, and that was a nice thing. And then my father went into a breathtaking decline. It was stunning. And he stopped sleeping. He started looking for her. And he'd say to me, can we call your mother? And I'd say, no, Dad, we can't call her, but you can call me anytime you want. Or he'd say, are we going to go to the hospital now? Are we going to go see your mother? And we'd say, no, Dad, we can't see her anymore. And he'd remember, and he'd just put his hands in his face. He told Joey, you did it. You went on after Ray died, but I can't go on. And so we started telling him, Dad, you go be with her, because we're going to be fine. We're okay. We're going to miss you, but we're going to be okay. And he had, she was in the hospital on a Thursday, and I came to spend the first weekend with him. And by Monday, Alan and Murray had found these angels who came and lived with him. And, however, he didn't sleep. So it drove the angels crazy. Florence and Francine, their names were. They were wonderful. And so eventually he got hospitalized to see if they could stabilize him. And then he went home, and then he went back into the hospital. And finally we just said, this isn't working. And we discharged him to a nursing home very close to Murray's house. And Murray and Sharon would stop by and see him every day, if not twice a day. And it was only an hour, less than an hour for me, so I came and saw him several times a week. And of course, Alan and Michael, everybody was going to see him. And on a Monday morning, he woke up. It was less than 2 months since Mom died. He woke up and said his chest hurt. He really wasn't complaining, but that was the only time he ever complained about anything. And so they took him to the hospital, and I came in and met him there. And he had had a massive heart attack. And I was happy because I could tell him the night before Jacob had gotten his first college acceptance. And I could tell Dad that Jacob was going to college. He wasn't going to go to that college, but he was starting to get his college acceptances. And it almost was like, make sure to tell Mom, Jacob got into college. And so at that point, I said to Murray was the executor, I said, this is crazy. Get him out of this hospital. We are not going to do anything medical to him. Get him back to the home, and we'll do hospice. And so they took him back, and the next day I came in early in the morning and spent the day with him. And I left for lunch, and I came back, and when I walked in the room, he gave me that Bob Cohen smile he knew it was me, and he knew I was there with him. And Murray was there with him. Alan was there most of the day, but at a certain point, Alan left. This was about, and then he died about an hour before Hanukkah started. So we had all these holidays and all this light, and it was a very amazing thing. And again, Murray and I were with him, and he just stopped breathing. It was very peaceful. I mean, Murray had to check to make sure he wasn't breathing. It was so peaceful. So Don and Jacob and Nathan and Tara, I'm really making this for you, especially you kids, so you can know what our lives were like, and your grandparents especially. And I just want to say to all of you that I love you. And I'm so grateful that I got to spend my life with you guys. I love you.